On the 6th of May, 1527, the heart of the known world bleeds out. Rome, the eternal city, the beacon of Christendom for over a millennium, is being devoured alive. An army of 20,000 mercenaries, a human tide of German Landsknechts and Spanish tercios, floods its streets. They fight not for a king nor for a flag. Their commander has fallen, and now their only loyalty is to plunder. Starving, furious, and unpaid, they transform the capital of the Renaissance into an inferno of steel and fire. The marble of the palaces is stained crimson, and the echoes of psalms are drowned by the screams of the dying. Civilization itself seems to be collapsing under the weight of a barbarian horde that has come to collect a debt from history, using the city as its currency. In the path of this apocalyptic avalanche, blocking the access to St. Peter's Basilica and to the Pope himself, stands not an imperial legion, nor an army of crusaders. The last line of defense for Christendom is a single, solitary company of men, 189 Swiss guards. They are an island of discipline in an ocean of chaos, an anachronism of loyalty in an age of betrayal. For the invaders, they are the final obstacle before the greatest spoils in Europe. For the Swiss themselves, they are the last wall before the abyss. The question hanging in the air, thick with smoke and death, is not whether they will die, for annihilation is a mathematical certainty. The true question is what their inevitable sacrifice will purchase on the scales of destiny. The victory of those 189 men would not be measured in survival, but in minutes. They did not challenge an army of 20,000 to defeat it, but to halt it, to transform themselves into a dike of flesh and bone against an unstoppable flood. Their loyalty, so fanatical it bordered on madness, their legendary discipline forged on 100 battlefields, and the strategic use of the Vatican's architectural bottlenecks were the weapons with which they forged a miracle. Their mission was not to live, but to buy enough time for Pope Clement VII to escape through a secret passage. On that day, the legacy of the Swiss Guard would not be written with ink on parchment, but with the blood of its martyrs upon the sacred cobblestones of Rome. At the head of this brotherhood of giants stands Captain Caspar Royst, a veteran forged on the anvil of the Italian wars. He is not a man given to poetry or grandiloquent speeches. His face is a map of scars, and his gaze carries the weight of a grim, unshakable resolve. For Royst, the oath that he and his men swore before the altar was not a mere formality, but a sacred contract sealed with God. Survival is a luxury, but duty is an absolute certainty. On the eve of annihilation, there is no fear in his heart, only the cold, quiet acceptance that his life and the lives of his men are the final price they must pay to honor their word. He is the embodiment of the Swiss spirit, pragmatic, lethal, and loyal to the last breath. His 189 men are not simple soldiers. They are the most feared and respected elite force in all of Europe. Each is a specialist in the art of war, a master of the pike, the halberd, and the broadsword. Their reputation precedes them. Wherever the Swiss Guard deploys, the tide of battle turns. They are a living shield wall, a hedgehog formation of steel that has broken the charges of the finest. Cavalry and decimated armies far superior in number. Their motivation lies not in gold or glory, though both have come to them in abundance. What drives them is a code of honor that transcends the earthly. To protect the pontiff is their divine duty, and to die in the fulfillment of that sacred mission is, for them, the greatest of glories. Crashing against this rock of discipline is a wave of chaos. The imperial army, composed of nearly 20,000 souls, was a formidable war machine under the command of Charles, Duke of Bourbon. But with his death in the initial assault, the machine has lost its engineer. The horde is composed of the fearsome German Landsknechts, many of them Lutherans with a fervent hatred for the opulence of Rome, and the veteran Spanish tercios, hardened by decades of war and desperate for the pay they are owed. Without a leader to impose discipline, the army becomes a mob, a headless monster moved by three primary appetites: fury, greed, and a profound contempt for the city that personifies papal power. This army's greatest strength is also its fatal weakness. Its overwhelming numerical superiority, which should guarantee an instant victory, becomes a tactical liability. Bourbon's death has created a power vacuum that no one can fill, transforming an invasion into a large-scale mutiny. Instead of a coordinated assault, what ensues is a frantic, disorganized race to the heart of the Vatican. They hinder one another, competing to be the first to the loot. This lack of cohesion and their arrogant dismissal of the small force standing in their way is the blind spot that Kaspar Royst is about to exploit. The giant is powerful, but it is a blind and furious giant, incapable of applying its strength with precision. The battlefield chosen by fate is the very heart of the Vatican. It is not an open plain where numbers can prevail, but a labyrinth of stone and faith. The wide stairways ascending to St. Peter's Basilica and the narrow gates of the adjacent Teutonic Cemetery become the silent protagonists of this tragedy. The terrain itself transforms into an unexpected ally for the Swiss. It acts as a mortal funnel, channeling the horde of 20,000 men into manageable torrents of fury. Every corner, every doorway, every flight of stairs neutralizes the enemy's advantage, forcing thousands to fight on a front where only a few dozen can fit. It is here, in this architectural slaughterhouse, where 189 men can, for a brief and glorious moment, stand against the entire world. It is in this precise instant that the strategic mind of Captain Kaspar Royst executes his masterstroke, a decision as brilliant as it is suicidal. Instead of ordering a retreat to the safety of the castle, he decides to divide his already minuscule force. The bulk of his men, 147 of them, will form a human wall on the steps of the basilica. Their mission is simple and terrifying: to die, to create a diversion so bloody and spectacular that it draws the full attention of the horde. Meanwhile, the remaining 42 guards, under the command of Hercules Goldley, will have an even more crucial task: to form a personal shield for the Pope and escort him through the 800 meters of the Passetto di Borgo, the secret corridor to the fortress of Castel Sant'Angelo. To witness how this deliberate sacrifice becomes legend, to see the clash of steel and faith against anarchy, subscribe to our channel and activate notifications, because the battle you are about to witness forged history with the blood of the brave. The storm finally breaks upon the ancient walls of Rome. The roar of imperial cannons and the clamor of 20,000 throats announce the beginning of the end. The city's defense is valiant but desperate, a mere formality before such an overwhelming force. In the midst of the confusion, while leading the assault near the Torrione Gate, the commander of the invading army, Charles of Bourbon rises to urge his men on. It is a moment of leadership that becomes his epitaph. A single arquebus shot, precise and lethal, rings out above the general din. The Duke collapses, life escaping his body before his men even comprehend what has happened. The head of the serpent has been severed in the first instant of the attack. The commander's death acts as a catalyst for anarchy. The last shadow of military discipline that contained the horde evaporates under the May sun. The Aig. Assault ceases to be a military operation and transforms into a frenzy of pure violence, an act of predation on a massive scale. The soldiers, freed from any chain of command, no longer seek victory for their emperor, but loot for their own pockets. The danger to Rome and its defenders multiplies exponentially. They no longer face an army, but a human cataclysm, a force of nature driven by greed and accumulated resentment, now advancing unchecked toward the sacred heart of the city, the Vatican. The imperial horde, in its blind race for the papal treasures, makes its most critical error. Waves of Landsknechts and Spaniards rush chaotically through the narrow streets of the Borgo, pushing and stumbling in their eagerness to be the first to plunder St. Peter's Basilica. Their numerical superiority cancels itself out, creating a monumental human traffic jam. The vanguard is crushed by the pressure of the troops behind them, transforming their advance into a compact and clumsy mass of men. They ignore any tactical principle, any precaution, convinced that the sheer force of their number will sweep away any obstacle. It is the arrogance of a flood that does not believe a small dike can hold it, not even for an instant. It is then that they come upon the hellish vision of the Swiss Guard. 147 men, arranged in a perfect phalanx formation at the base of the steps of St. Peter's. They stand in sepulchral silence, a solid block of polished steel and granite determination. Their 5-meter-long pikes bristle forward, creating a forest of deadly points. Behind them, the halberdiers and swordsmen wait, ready to cover the flanks and finish off those who manage to break through the first line. The contrast is absolute. The chaotic roar of thousands against the disciplined silence of a few. For the invaders, it is a disconcerting sight, an unexpected pause in their race for glory and gold. The first clash is a thunder of flesh and steel. The vanguard of the Imperial horde, unable to stop due to the push of the mass behind it, smashes against the Swiss wall of pikes. The result is a slaughter. The men in the first ranks are mercilessly impaled, their bodies creating a grotesque barrier that momentarily slows their comrades. The long Swiss pikes, wielded with lethal precision, keep the attackers at a distance, preventing them from using their shorter swords. Every attempt to break the formation is met with a disciplined thrust. For a high moment, the impossible seems to happen. The advance of thousands of men is stopped dead in its tracks by the cold, methodical violence of 147. Kaspar Royst's plan is working. The fierce resistance on the steppes has captured the attention of the entire invading army. The combat becomes the epicenter of the battle, a vortex of violence that draws in more and more Imperial soldiers, eager to avenge the humiliation of being halted by a handful of guards. While the massacre unfolds, a parallel and desperate operation takes place a few meters away. Hercules Goldley and his 42 men form a protective capsule around a terrified Pope Clement VII. They rush him towards the entrance of the Passetto di Borgo, the only narrow escape route. The fate of the papacy now depends on a race against time. The steps of the basilica have become an altar of sacrifice. The 147 guards are now completely surrounded, fighting back-to-back on a ground slick, with blood and viscera. All hope of survival has vanished, replaced by a single final purpose: to resist. Every thrust, every parry, every life taken from the enemy buys one more second for the pontiff. They fight with the fury of the damned, their battle cries mingling with the prayers of the dying. They have become the embodiment of their oath, a human bulwark that refuses to yield as long as a single one of them can still wield a weapon. Meanwhile, in the gloom of the elevated corridor of Iai, the Passetto, the Pope runs for his life. The 800 meters to the safety of Castel Sant'Angelo seem like an eternity. Behind him, the sounds of battle echo like the hammer blows of fate. The clash of steel, the screams of agony, the roar of the mob. They are the sounds of his men dying for him. Every step he takes on the stone slabs of the passage has been paid for with a guard's life. Goldley's 42 men surround him, their faces tense, their swords drawn, ready to repel any enemy incursion that might discover their escape route. It is a funeral procession and a race for survival at the same time. The combat on the steppes reaches its brutal crescendo. Swiss discipline and favorable terrain can only hold back the tide for so long. Little by little, the weight of numbers begins to prevail. For every Imperial soldier that falls, 10 more take his place. The Swiss guards, exhausted, wounded, and with no possibility of relief, begin to fall one by one. Their pikes break, their halberds are blunted, and the fight devolves into a desperate melee. The formation disintegrates into small pockets of resistance, each man fighting on his own, surrounded by a sea of enemies. It is the end, but a defiant and glorious end. Finally, the wall of steel breaks. The last of the 147 guards are overwhelmed and mercilessly slaughtered. The fury of the Landsknechts, contained for so long, is unleashed upon the bodies of the fallen. Captain Kaspar Royst himself, gravely wounded during the fray, manages to crawl to his house adjacent to the battlefield. But there is no refuge for him. Spanish soldiers burst into his residence and murder him in cold blood in front of his wife, putting a brutal end to a life of service and honor. The last stand has been annihilated, and the path to the heart of the Vatican is finally open to the invaders. But the sacrifice has not been in vain. Just as the horde's cries of victory echo on the steppes, a different sound is heard in the distance, the metallic screech and dull thud of a heavy drawbridge closing. At the imposing fortress of Castel Sant'Angelo, the gates have been sealed. Pope Clement VII and his 42 escorts are safe inside. They have arrived just in time, mere moments before the vanguards of the Imperial army reached the fortress. The mission, the impossible mission to save the pontiff, has been accomplished. The price was the annihilation of almost the entire guard, but the oath has been honored. The final collapse of the resistance at the basilica marks the success of the guard's mission. Though 147 of them lie dead, their strategic objective has been achieved. They channeled the fury of an entire army onto themselves, creating the perfect diversion. Their death was not a defeat, but the calculated cost of a much greater victory. The final image of the battle is this heartbreaking contrast: the massacre of the brave on the steps of the world's most sacred church, and the gate of a castle closing to preserve the life they swore to protect. The legend of the Swiss Guards' unwavering loyalty has just been written in blood. The statistics of the carnage are as clear as they are terrifying. Of the 189 Swiss Guards who faced the dawn, 147 lie dead at their posts. Only the 42 men of the papal escort have survived the initial confrontation, barricaded with the pontiff, but their sacrifice is, just a microcosm of the devastation that befalls Rome. Over the following days, the city is subjected to a sack of unprecedented brutality. The population of the Eternal City, which stood at 55,000 souls before the assault, plummets to a mere 10,000 due to massacres, famine, and the diseases that follow in the army's wake. Rome, the jewel of the Renaissance, is reduced to a smoking, desecrated shell. The fate of the defended commander, Pope Clement VII, is a Pyrrhic victory that tastes of defeat. Although his life has been saved by the sacrifice of his guards, he becomes a prisoner within his own refuge. Castel Sant'Angelo transforms from a fortress into a gilded cage. For months, he remains captive, helplessly watching the destruction of his city. Finally, on June 6th, he is forced to surrender and pay a humiliating ransom of 400,000 ducats to the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, the man whose mutinous armies had caused the catastrophe. The power of the papacy, which had defied kings and emperors for centuries, is temporarily broken, and the Pope reduced to a pawn on the European political chessboard. For the invading army, victory is as chaotic and empty as its own assault. Without central leadership, the plunder continues for weeks until there is nothing of value left to steal. Discipline disintegrates completely, and soldiers from different nations come to blows over the spoils. Soon, diseases spread by the thousands of unburied corpses begin to wreak havoc in their ranks, taking a higher toll than any battle. The great imperial force, which had conquered the Eternal City, consumes itself in a feast of self-destruction, eventually dispersing not as a victorious army, but as bands of enriched yet decimated thieves. Their triumph becomes a monument to anarchy and senseless destruction. The political impact of the sack of Rome and the Pope's capitulation resonates throughout Europe, altering the course of history in unexpected ways. With Pope Clement VII a virtual prisoner of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, the balance of power shifts decisively. This subjugation of the papacy has a direct and monumental consequence across the English Channel. When King Henry VIII of England seeks an annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, he finds a pope who cannot or dares not defy the emperor, as Catherine is Charles V's aunt. Clement's refusal, dictated by his political weakness, becomes the spark that ignites the English Reformation, severing England from the Catholic Church forever. For the Swiss Guard, the event becomes their foundational myth, the cornerstone of their identity and legend. The sacrifice of May 6, 1527, cements their reputation not only as elite soldiers, but as the most loyal and courageous protection force the world has ever known. The story of how fewer than 200 men stood firm against an army of 20,000 to save the Pope becomes an epic tale told in every court in Europe. Their name becomes synonymous with loyalty unto death, a standard of honor to which all other bodyguard corps would aspire, but few could ever match. The brand of the Swiss Guard, from that day forward, is forged in the fire and blood of Rome. This legacy is not a dusty relic of history, but a living, breathing tradition. To this day, more than 500 years later, the memory of those 147 martyrs is honored in the most solemn manner. Every May 6th, in the San Damaso courtyard of the Vatican, the new recruits of the Pontifical Swiss Guard take their oath of loyalty. With their hand on the Guard's standard, they swear to protect and defend the reigning pontiff and his successors, if necessary, with the sacrifice of their own lives. It is a direct echo of the promise fulfilled by Caspar Royst and his men, an unbroken chain of duty that connects the present to that terrible and glorious day in 1527. Ultimately, the last stand of the Swiss Guard compels us to redefine the concept of victory. In purely military terms, they suffered a catastrophic defeat. they were almost completely annihilated. Yet, they achieved their primary strategic objective, the survival of the Pope. Their story proves that victory is not always measured in one's own survival, but in the successful fulfillment of a mission, in the defense of a principle, or in the honoring of an oath, regardless of the personal cost. The sacrifice of the 147 was not an act of desperation, but the ultimate expression of their purpose. Their triumph lies not in having lived, but in the reason for which they chose to die, leaving an imperishable legacy of fidelity. The brutality of the event is immortalized in one final detail, an image so personal and harrowing that it encapsulates the fury the guards faced. After the massacre, the body of Captain Kaspar Royst, the architect of the resistance, was carried by his surviving men to his home and placed on his marital bed. But the barbarity of the invaders respected not even the dead. A group of soldiers stormed the residence and desecrated his corpse right there, savagely mutilating it. His wife, in an act of love and desperation, tried to shield her husband's body with her own, and the assailants cut off her fingers. It is a vignette of extreme cruelty that illustrates the nature of the hell those 189 men chose to defy. Thus, the legend of the Swiss Guard was sealed forever. They did not fight for a king who could betray them, nor for a nation that could forget them, nor for a territory that could be conquered. They fought and died for something intangible yet indestructible, an oath. Their story resonates through the centuries not as a tale of conquest, but as the ultimate testament to fidelity. Those 189 men have become immortal, not for the thousands of enemies they faced, but because they remind us that the true worth of a warrior is not measured by his ability to take a life, but by that for which he is willing to give his own.